Let's talk some smallmouth bass fishing.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Oh God, it's a toad, son. It's a toad, dude.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.
What is going on, folks? Welcome back to the OneCast. I'm in studio with Trey. Pete can't join us. He was gonna call in from Lake Gaston. He's up there pre-fishing for a tournament him and Trey have this weekend, but he's got some issues right now with the boat. Hopefully he can figure out. If not, Trey's going to be pulling his boat up there later tonight.
Those steering cables, sometimes they just go bad, guys, but it's all good.
They'll get over it, or they'll recover, and they'll make it happen this weekend. Here in a few minutes, we're going to bring on friend of the show. I think it's his either third or fourth time coming on, Destin Demarion. He's a smallmouth expert, and Trey and I don't have a lot of experience on smallmouth fishing in the South for most of our lives, since you got in the Army, at least, Trey.
That's
so
right.
We're going to bring him on. We're going to dive it into, but first, as you all know, we have those sponsors to cover here. So make sure you go over to OneCast Fishing. Join the snagless revolution. We have restocked. The soft plastics full lineup is back, adding an additional color as well on the javelin. So get those snagless jigs, long neck hook, and weedless neds.
That's right. Also, if you guys are looking to cover yourself up and stay protected for this summer that's coming up, head on over to CarolinaWatersNC.com. They have all the UPF apparel. They got great things that are getting ready to come into stock. Some really cool surprises. So head on over CarolinaWatersNC.com. Use the code TheOneCast. They got awesome shirts, hats, maybe some other things coming. You guys are going to save some change at checkout.
It's also bed fishing season.
That's right.
And what do you need for bed fishing?
A good pair of eyes, man.
You got to have a great pair of polarized sunglasses. So make sure you go over to Hobie Eyewear. Use the link down below in the description. That's our affiliate link. So one, you save some money. It helps us out a little bit. But we all have multiple pairs of Hobie Eyewear now. We have the lifestyle version. We've got the Sight Master. We've got the regular floating frames. They got prescription options, men and women. So go check them out. Highly recommended. I've been using them a lot lately.
Tell you what, you're never going to lose another pair of sunglasses off the boat flying down the lake at 60 miles an hour if you got the floating collection. So we highly recommend those. So, and also, guys, if you're in the market, we know interest rates are tough and things like that, but if you're in the market to own your own piece of paradise, head on over and hit our buddy Eric Schwinn up at Mossy Oak Properties. You can shoot him a text or give him a call at 936-494-9686. or email him at eschwind@mossyoakproperties.com. Eric is serving the Sandhills region, the Triangle area. He's got a plethora of small pieces of paradise, from woodland, hardwoods, to places with rolling landscapes and waterways, all sorts of options for you if you're in the market for owning your own piece of paradise. So you can shoot him a text, give him a call, shoot him an email. He's going to get you hooked up and hopefully get you your little slice of paradise. All right. Did we miss anything?
I think we got them all.
Well, let's not leave Destin waiting. Is there anything that we need to cover beforehand?
I mean, there's some things that happen in the industry, but I don't think we want to cover it right now. I think we want some more voices to come out. We're expecting more information to come out with all the drama that's going on.
Drama.
Yeah, we'll leave it alone for now, and then we'll probably hit it on course on our Friday lives. And that's a shameless plug too. If you listen to this, we also go live pretty much every Friday on our Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and we just talk fishing, engage with you all. Although I say that, and I was going to say that won't happen this Friday because you guys are gone, but this episode drops later, so disregard.
Let's plug one more thing about Fishing Friday Live and leave Destin waiting for a second because we love him. We did our first giveaway. So if you only listen or watch the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, whatever the case may be, and you don't join the Fishing Friday Lives, you're missing an opportunity to get enrolled into our giveaway. So
let me correct you there. They can still get enrolled. They just want to hear the announcement. So with that giveaway, our first one was on Friday. That was for the month of March. Congratulations, Randy. He got an Icon chatterbait rod from Cashin and a 4 of our snagless jigs from OneCast Fishing as well. But for the next 4 months, we got 4 more prize packs. We talk about it every Fishing Friday. That's when we do the announcement of the winner at the last Friday of every single month.
Yeah. Join the Fishing Friday Live.
All right. Enough of the shameless plugs there. All right. Let's bring on friend of the show, former Bassmaster Opens EQ, and Bassmaster Elite Series angler Destin Demarion.
Awesome father,
Hello.
awesome husband, awesome friend. What's up, brother?
Not much, guys. I was just really enjoying that whole opening thing. You guys got it really down to a science.
Man, we do our best. We definitely appreciate it. Back when we first started the show, and you were one of the very first guests we had on, you can imagine the 15 to 20, 25 minutes of trying to warm up and get the routine, and this is before we had any sponsors besides OneCast Fishing. So it's definitely grown. We've kind of got our routine down a little bit better, but it's always changing. We never write a script for anything. So we definitely appreciate the feedback.
You guys have a lot of practice. I mean, you've gotten really good, so keep it up. Well, I like how long-winded the sponsor thing is. It's only going to get more, so that's good.
You gotta put them in the beginning, because if you put them at the end, then everyone just signs off.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It just assumes that everybody's going to listen the whole way through, and I just might not be entertaining enough, obviously.
I know, right?
but for now, we lump them all together. So if people want to skip forward, now maybe at some point some big money sponsors will come along and we'll be forced to do a mid roll or something. But
like a cool commercial with Destin and his new sponsor he's going to talk about, and it's all integrated, AI generated or whatever, dude.
Oh yes, AI, it's taking over.
So, dude, welcome back to the show. It's 2024. Give us an update of what's been going on in your life before we deep dive into catching those brownfish.
Yeah, I've been fishing. I've been fishing since February, which honestly, February and most of March was, pretty fishable and nice up here on Erie. The last couple of weeks have been kind of, it was warming up and now the water's back down to about, low 40s. It was up towards 50, but it looks like we got some warm weather coming back. I've been rehabbing my neck. About to finish up a month of rehab doing that, and just spending time with my family, working, just getting prepared for the season, really.
Absolutely.
Did Erie get iced over this year? Was there a lot of ice?
No, not at all. There was like maybe a week we had a really cold, sustained couple of weeks of weather, and they got maybe a week of ice fishing in, and then it was you couldn't ice fish anymore, which I was happy about.
I mean, you would think that also speed up the bass season too. Yeah, I can't even fathom 40-degree water kind of being the normal, because I think the coldest I have seen here is like 47, and that was a few years ago.
Yeah, it's gotten down here before, but it's few far in between. Do you think forward-facing sonar is causing global warming?
Oh, I think forward-facing sonar is probably our demise as a country. You can blame every problem we have in the country on forward-facing sonar.
There's no ice on the lake because of forward-facing sonar. Way to go, guys.
I think whatever presidential candidate supports forward-facing is going to go down.
We should make a spoof video with I know we don't talk politics.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think most anglers probably do not like one certain person.
Sure.
Yes.
We could make we should have done it for April Fool's Day of that person banning forward-facing sonar.
Oh man, that would have went viral. There you go.
Campaign commercial.
That's the number one campaign for whatever party's running. Like, we are going to make sure everybody gets the equal amount of forward-facing sonar.
Talk about AI and deep fakes.
Yeah.
I mean,
so LV62 transducers for everyone.
Oh yeah, everybody. It's like Oprah did. Like, you get a forward-facing
exactly. I think 62 is the fancy schmancy $10,000 one that everybody's getting now.
Oh, that LVS 62, that Garmin one?
Yeah, that's the one that you can see like crystal clear 140 feet or whatever.
Really?
Oh,
to be honest, I didn't know that it came out with that. I just had to replace my transducer because the crystals went bad in it, and of course I couldn't convince them to upgrade me to the 34, so I still use
32.
It's a brand new 32. I mean, it works way better than it works way better than it was working, because it was all jacked up. But man,
I've had other people I know had the same issue on the 32s. The crystals, going bad on that, but they usually take care of you.
Yeah. Garmin does great with the customer service. I've had a couple of issues over the years, and I call them up and I describe what was going on. He's like, Yeah, I know exactly what the problem is.
Yeah.
And he looked up. He looked up when I bought it, and it was packaged up, I think, in April of 19. So it was one of the very first within the first year or so. Yeah, it'd been running ever since.
They work, whatever. So, dude, you said you were getting prepped for the so you're rehabbing your neck.
Mm-hmm.
You're not fishing the EQs this year because medical and family and everything else. What does your 2024 season look like for tournament trails?
We're starting up in 2 weeks. We got an early season tournament up in New York. There's like a big bass tournament that my buddy Andy and I will fish. Actually, he's the one I fished the Douglas Opens with, which that's the hat, where we had like almost 30 pounds up there in one of the tournaments. But it's like an early season big fish tournament and cool format. I've never actually fished a big bass type format. I don't know if you guys have, but a lot of them I haven't been allowed just based on entry fee quotas and yada yada. But I've always wanted to, so I'm excited about that. But a lot of bigger regional stuff. I'm going to fish one at St. Clair later in the year. St. Lawrence, I got one for the Douglas Big Money Opens. Doc's Tackle also supports that as well, another sponsor. Then we have another one at Buffalo. So there's 2 Douglas Big Money Opens. There's one at St. Lawrence in June, and then there's one at Buffalo in October, which is prime time. Okay. And then doing the Northern Toyota Series. So those start in June at the Potomac River and St. Lawrence and Champlain over the summer.
So you're getting to fish as much, if not more, and saving a lot more money.
Right. Yeah, guiding when I can and working a lot. So busy.
A lot less travel too, it sounds like. So that should be a good. Yeah. What is it, the first time in what? I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years or something? You got a little more. More time with the family.
I will be traveling a lot for Dured. We just started sponsoring minor league baseball. So I'm going to like, I don't know, 15 different events, on the West Coast. And we start down in Jacksonville at the end of April. And we're going to be in Durham near you guys. So I'm going to hopefully connect with you guys in May.
Absolutely.
So, well, I think you got a little prize pack to bring me anyways, right?
I do.
I'm gonna have to Zelle or hand you a couple American greenbacks here. But hey, that's a question, and I don't know if we ever asked you before, and we've had a couple former Elite Series guys on, Harvey Horn, yourself. I can't remember who else, but when these guys and gals jump into these national level trails, and there's a lot more national level trails than just the elites in the BPT, right? Fishers of Men is national. Now you got the TAA. I don't know if you saw that.
I've been following that. I'm interested.
Yeah. You got ABA.
Yeah. ABA, MPFL, all those things. But, going from the elites, where your time is extremely, I don't know, constrained, if you will, are you finding a lot more peace now that you're not like fishing the elites? I'm not saying fishing it's bad, but what has that done to you as far as family and everything else? Has it really changed your outlook on a lot of like tournament fishing?
Yeah, I'd say overall it has. When I made the elites, we were bringing a kid into the world. So like going into the year, I didn't know if I was going to have to miss a tournament at the beginning of my career because my kid was due like at the second tournament of the year. So, and then the world shut down, so yep. It was an interesting year. I wouldn't say it was like overly stressful. Yeah, it was. There was a lot of other things going on, but it's definitely a little bit more, manageable, I would say. My wife likes having me around to do stuff and help with the kid, which is, obviously, why wouldn't she? She needs that. So I'm around some more. I'm going to be gone a lot in the spring and the summer. But fall and winter, pretty much I've been around. Been on a couple trips for work and stuff, but really not much after that. It's kind of nice. It's not the same level of competition, but there's good competition. I
for sure.
It. We fished the team championship last year, which it's not the Elite Series, but I mean, it was fun. I like the team stuff. I really enjoy the team
Me too.
tournament.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that team tournament format, no matter what you're fishing from the club level all the way up to heck, I think MLF has a team tournament series now, don't they?
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, like it's just fun because you got somebody else in the boat. Either you're having a great time or you're both sucking together. It doesn't matter. But
or one person stuck and the other one's helping out.
Pick up the slack, right?
And that's the great thing about it, because now you have two lines in the water, and you can be doing the same thing if you're on something. You can be doing something completely different. I mean, bait wise, you're going to be in the same location basically, but 20 feet apart. But presentation wise, and you can kind of it cuts down on that. Learning curve is not the right word for this, but those decisions, right? Of breaking down the conditions at that moment.
You ever find that challenging though in the team format? Like, depending on whose boat you're in, if you're in your boat, does your partner always rely on you to make the decisions, or is it more of a democracy? Yeah.
Most team tournaments I fish, it's out of my boat, but I do fish some with other friends and stuff, and I'm good with it. I prefer doing it out of my boat. I like to make those decisions, but ultimately I listen to who I'm fishing with. If they've got something to say, I'm gonna take it into account, and sometimes I'll do it just based on I mean, if it's a good suggestion and I feel like they're making a very valid judgment based on the conditions and stuff, I'm going to go with it. I mean, even if I didn't think about it, I don't care. It doesn't matter. You can't have an ego out there when you're doing a team tournament, and you just got to both, it doesn't matter if I caught them all or if he caught them all. Like that's how you have to work together. And you guys just had a very nice team tournament yourself, you and Mr. Pete, who's not here.
Yeah, it was fun. The reason I asked you that is because, like depending on who's operating the boat, and we're doing the whole, to save money, save maintenance type deal for this season is flip-flopping boats for tournaments, right?
That's perfect.
I think it helps out a lot, and it kind of takes that pressure off the guy that ran the boat the last time, and now he's kind of along for the ride, still making decisions and stuff like that. But I think it kind of creates that healthy balance that you're looking for, because sometimes and you've been operating a boat at the highest level for a long time, but sometimes I just want to be a passenger.
Yeah, it's nice.
And just fish off the back. Now, granted, I've had it many times where the person fishing off the back has everything that Ben was talking about just right. The presentation, everything, the cadence, all that stuff, the bait, and they whack them out of the back of the boat, and you're struggling up front, but that's okay. Because we're all in it for the same purpose. So, but yeah, I mean, and now you're going to be fishing a lot of smallmouth team tournament stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much. Almost all the bigger ones are more mouth related. That's a mouthful, right? The Toyota's a little bit of both, I'd say, but more so smallmouth oriented. Champlain and St. Lawrence, but Champlain's a place I've done really well on largemouth. Potomac's pretty much strictly largemouth, which is a good mix of the top northern fisheries that we have as far as for big, tournament venues. But yeah, I mean, definitely gonna have to have the smallmouth game really dialed in this year.
Oh, yeah.
And throughout the seasons, different times. The first one, obviously, is the early season here. The Dash for Cash here in Buffalo on Erie with Andy, and then the next one, next bigger one I think is in June, is that Douglas Big Money Open, which is the 22nd, pretty much prime spawning time on St. Lawrence right after the season opens. So a really different scenario. Going to be some huge bags in that one too. Most of them are going to be absolute smash fest. I mean, both Douglas Big Money Opens have the potential to have like multiple 30-pound bags. So it's going to be pretty sweet.
Now, so your season then starts in May. So smallmouth season, I am asking because I don't really know.
Sure.
It starts more around May, June timeframe, because in the South it's, I mean, depending on where you're at, Florida is like January, but it's usually February, and a lot of the South is when our tournaments start, because you get that first couple pre-spawn tournaments, you move into spawn, and then a lot of trails down here, they end around June, right before it gets too hot. So
yeah, it gets way too hot around you guys.
Oh yeah. So
so like it usually starts about now. Like April is when we kick off. So our season closes for bass like second or third week of April. As far as like keeping them, Erie has special regulations. You can keep one over 20 inches, so that's why we can have this big bass tournament in a couple weeks.
Okay.
So you could we'll keep two together, to weigh in for the big fish if we catch a couple 20 plus inches. But we have a couple early season tournaments here. There's only really a couple places that are, typically the ones they have them at is Erie, Presque Isle Bay, or Raystown, which is down like more in central Pennsylvania. It's another typically a smallmouth reservoir, like a highland reservoir, I'd say, similar like a Cherokee or lake or something like that. And they actually just had to cancel. It got flooded out, so all the launches they're supposed to have a tournament this weekend, but a couple tournaments, and it got flooded out. But yeah, we typically start about now. The season closes. Some smaller inland lakes are, they have different regs, so they'll have some tournaments at those places. They're typically largemouth places, and then New York opens up in June for the real season, as well as Pennsylvania for our regular bass season.
Yeah, I was going to ask that too, because I know like Canada definitely has seasons, and I knew some states were about. I didn't know if you all in Pennsylvania and New York all had those seasons.
All about the same. We're all roughly about the same time periods for seasons and stuff. Lake Ontario, like St. Lawrence, has a little bit different regulations, I think, and then the Canadian side is even later. I believe.
Do you know why they do that? Because we watch smallmouth spawn tournaments in June, and like the season's open, so they're not really protecting the fish during the spawn during that time. So
no, and people are taking them and eating them. They actually do that here. We have a large Amish population, and when the season opens, there'll be a lot of Amish people in a boat taking bass, as they're bedding. Not just Amish people. I mean, other people keep bass too. But once the season opens, they're still spawning. They're still spawning for a good month, depending on where they're at. Erie will last a little longer, but
I think Corey and Chris Johnston made that comment a few months ago about Canada specifically. It was like, each lake there has its own, season and creel limit and all that stuff. But it appears that the time that the bass season opens is in the heart of the spawn, which doesn't even make any sense. It's like, if you're going to do it in a time where it's not the spawn, to protect the fishery. But none of us are biologists, but it almost makes almost like common sense. It's like,
from what we've told over the last few years, it doesn't really matter if the season, because
I guess not. Look at the St. Lawrence River. Look at Champlain. Look at Erie. Like, look at all
St. Clair.
St. Clair. Yeah, they're fire. But since we're on smallmouth, which is what we wanted to talk about in the show primarily, because we got a lot of listeners that are from the northern area. But there's not only smallmouth in the north. I mean, there's smallmouth in Hawaii, one of the islands there too. But so what I kind of wanted to do, and Ben, if you're on board with this, kind of go through the, I guess the pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn smallies, and how you live on Erie, essentially. I mean, you're 5 minutes away from the boat ramp there. I've never been out there before, but it definitely looks like an ocean. If you were a new angler, or maybe not even a new angler, but can you break down like the way you approach the pre-spawn? Let's go pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn. And can you break down the pre-spawn, what you're looking for, and what your bait choices are for the pre-spawn for smallmouth?
Yeah, so I've had the treat this year of starting a lot earlier than normal. And basically, I'd never fished this early, in early February. And I found out a lot more stuff about them that I didn't even really know, just based on it usually being covered in ice. And no one really catches them under the ice here. It's very atypical for people to catch smallmouth under the ice on Erie specifically. So I just started by going back to the place I was catching them in late November, and they're still there. They're still in the same places. So those winter holes, they'll stay there for, a while. I feel like once the water starts getting towards that, low 40 range, they start moving a lot. Once it gets low 40s, mid 40s, they're really going to be on the move, working towards those, staging areas. Once that water gets, into the mid 50s, it turns into, a almost spawn type thing. They're about to. I think the magic number is close to 60, but it can start earlier. Between 55 and 60, they can start spawning. So once that water is getting up towards 50, their clock's going off. Like, okay, I need to keep eating and I need to eat quickly because I don't have much more time.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the winter, they've just been sitting there, trying not to expend much energy. So, I'm starting in those wintering type holes. I'm looking for stuff like chunk rock, depressions and stuff that's you're gonna make it so they don't have to fight current from the wind as much and just stay there. Places where the water is not going to get typically as dirty, because they don't like filtering dirt and mud. Smallmouth are very finicky to the dirtiness in the water. They don't like it. They like clear water. They're visual feeders. I don't think they can see very good. Typically, even when it's dark here, they don't bite very good until like I think later on in the evening when the moon's up. But I've never done that good, when it's real dark. Right after it turns dark, they shut off. They can't see, and they're just not that kind of a feeder like a catfish or something that's relying on other senses. That's why smallmouth proliferate in places like here. When the zebra mussels and the quagga mussels got on here, they cleared out the lake, so it basically made it a sight feeder's dream. And that's why we have so many big, predator fish, because they can hunt so effectively. They can see so well. The bait fish schools have proliferated too. I mean, everything has, and it's been great. But yeah, so like I'm following them through from those winter type holes now. In the fall, they're pretty much in the same place. As the water gets into the 40s, I'm looking for them to start moving up onto breaks. I'm looking for them to get onto, a little bit shallower on humps, things like that. Looking for bait. The presence of bait is going to be key because that's what they're following. That's what they want to be around because it's easy. If they stay around bait, they can eat more efficiently. They don't have to chase them. They don't have to follow, they're not moving as much. The water's still cold and they don't want to expend a ton of energy, but as it gets warmer, they're expending more and more and more, and they got to eat more and more. So they get in that feed binge, I'd say in the 40s, like that mid 40, upper 40, low 50s. That's like the prime time.
When it comes to bait, when you're looking for bait, because the only smallmouth experience I have is out like in the Ozarks. So it's very different. It's shad. They don't have gobies. Probably more.
We do have shad.
Based.
Shad are a big forage for our fish too.
So that was what I was going to ask. Like, what type of bait are you looking for? I think we all know as anglers kind of how the shad operates in the spring and all. But are the gobies, do they do the same thing, or do they? I don't know anything about gobies and goby behavior. So
yeah, it seems like they get more on the shad. The shad are migrating, basically following a similar path. They're working their way to where they're going to ultimately spawn too, and they're following where the warm water is too. So like in the Great Lakes, a lot of it is whichever way the wind's blowing, it's pushing, warm water a certain way or cold water a certain way. So an area can be destroyed if it pushed in a lot of really cold water and pushed it in that area. The fish are going to basically shut down or vamoose and try to find somewhere warmer. A lot of times I've heard about this from my friends like that fish Sturgeon Bay. Like the bay is going to be, this side of the bay gets all the wind, the east side the one day, and then it just keeps pushing cold water in there from like the main lake, and it just ruins the fishing. But then, it pushes another way and there's warm water pushing this way and all the warm water goes that way and they got to find the warm water. So like, that's kind of what happens here too. We have a lot of hard, strong winds, a lot of fronts coming through. So the bait is moving. They're trying to find warm water where, there's more plankton and grass growth and things that are going to attract them, to eat as well. So all those, perch and everything, they're all trying to move to a lot of the same areas to eat and spawn. And, the bass are behind the perch a little bit from spawning and stuff, but they're they're following in the bait schools and trying to find warmer water and just kind of set up and chow down for a while.
What's your when you're looking for those pre-spawn fish? You know, we always hear it in fishing, like match the hatch.
Yes.
Granted, you can catch anything on a Ned rig with a little turd bait, but traditionally in the pre-spawn area, when you're looking for those schools of bait, and you're looking for those staging areas for those smallmouth, which you said are similar, the winter holes and stuff. What are you targeting? Like, what's your go-to baits for those fish? Because a lot of times they're super deep, right?
Yeah. Initially, yeah. But I mean, when that water's up in the mid 40s, a lot of them will start coming, significantly shallower. Where you can
what do you
target
mean
them
by shallower? Because we know smallmouth will spawn in 10, 20 feet of water.
Yeah, they will. To me, like anything less than 20 is shallow. I'd say.
Yeah, here we're hardly fishing deeper than 15
well,
feet.
Right. It's a different world for you guys down there.
100%.
Yeah. It's water clarity related, I think, is a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes in the spring, if it's been calm and the water settled out in the lake, I can see down 18 feet. So like that's not that deep relatively because you can see the fish. To me, deep is like I'd say upper 20s, 30 plus, I would consider here is deep. And anything 20 and in is shallow. But I'm talking specifically like, once the water's in the mid 40s and 50, they'll start getting in, 10 to 20, they'll get shallower like that. Sometimes even shallower than that, 5 to 10.
This reminded me that you said 18, 20 feet, you can see the bottom, and that kind of sounds deep to us. But the way I think about
it's your boat.
It's your boat.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, if you think about it like that, it really doesn't seem that deep. And when you're here and you're in the clear water, you're like, 20 feet. It's like not very deep.
So how are you picking those brown fish off?
Yeah, so like I was talking about, they're on bait. So to answer your question, Ben, like yes, they're on shad big time. That's a typical forage that they're following. Alewives, we have alewives here, very typical for a lot of the fisheries up in the Great Lakes region because they're all connected. And emerald shiners, they're a little bit smaller. Typically that's what the perch eat a lot. The bass will eat them as well. But the bass are looking for a little bit more substantial meal. They want something that's 3.5, 4-inch long shad, which there's a plethora of them. A lot of shad are dying this time of year. It's why jerkbait is really good. Yeah, it's mimicking that erratic and then kind of just slow movement or suspending. Jerkbait I typically use when they're closer to 15 feet and less. I would say typically. I'd say one of the best ways to target them is with a small finesse swim bait. So something like 3 inches, even up to 4. Something slender, you can just kind of crawl or work fast. You can easily manipulate, how quickly you move the bait based on how heavy your jig head is. The thing I use mostly when they're still in that cold weather pattern and transitioning is like a Demiki, like a jig minnow. Back on the forward facing talk. Yes, it's all about the jig minnow, but I use like an angler tungsten, like a tungsten head with the screw lock, so it keeps my bait perfectly straight. The one thing I've noticed, if you're dropping on fish or if you're just throwing a jig minnow in general, like whether I'm hover strolling it or what, or mid strolling, I want it to completely be perfectly straight. If I've caught a couple of fish and I'm not paying attention, I'll look and it'll just have a different action to it as it's falling or as I'm reeling it back in. It just doesn't look perfectly natural. And the fish are eating that because it looks as natural as possible. It's very unassuming. It's very like subtle. There's not any action to it. With a fluke style bait and a jig head, it's barely doing anything. It's just looking very easy to eat. And when a bait fish gets away from a school by itself, that's the one to pick off, right? It's the easy prey. So that's what I use a lot. Blade bait, very common. If they're being finicky, especially, you can just sit on them and keep jigging it in their face, and eventually they're going to either get mad at it or try to headbutt it or whatever they do to it. But that's a typical really good pattern is a blade bait. Once again, mimicking a bait fish.
Any spoons?
Yeah, for sure. We use spoons. Anything like that shiny, bait fishy profile in that 3-4 inch range is perfect. I mean, a lot of the bigger fish want those, 4-inch shad, alewives. And if you can present that bait in a very subtle manner or aggressive reaction manner and just keep it in their strike zone, even if it's cold, they'll usually fire on it.
One of the things that I noticed this winter when I went out and worked on my forward-facing sonar game a little bit more, is, the blade bait is extremely deadly here in the Carolinas. And I think it works everywhere, right?
Yes.
One of the things that I noticed, and I'm curious to know if smallies act this way, is the largemouth that I was targeting in the winter pattern were anywhere between 20 and 30 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And, just like you talked about, like, while a largemouth gets really shallow in the, in the spring and stuff like that, like it's been debunked, but we've all known they've been out in the middle of the water and stuff too. Well, on some of those days, they'll have their bellies in the mud. And so that blade bait, what I would do this winter, and it paid off, is I would put it about maybe 6 to 12 inches off the bottom of the lake, and then just dead stick it. Mm-hmm. The natural movement in the water would just keep it there, and those largemouth would come up and just grab it. Do smallies do the exact same thing?
Yeah, they do. And I think it's a very similar concept to like the Demiki. You're holding it right over their head. It's not really doing much, but the wind and just the slight movements of your boat are just enacting enough to make it look, natural. It's just moving with the current. It's moving naturally. It's shiny. It's white. It's bait fishy. And, if it's close to them, they're going to come up and get it, eventually.
Right. Same concept as a drop shot too.
Yeah. So you talked about the bait, and you talked about some of the areas that you're looking for in the pre-spawn. You're clearly using electronics a lot of times, right? Mm-hmm. And we all know, and if for those listening and watching didn't know, like the guys in the north really perfected, the jig head minnow technique, and a lot of those that you see now that, forward-facing sonar is enhancing. But Pete talked about it before, taking 2D sonar units and like flipping them up and using that to stroll and do different things. But talk about the conditions. So you talked about, bright bluebird skies, like the smallies like it. We're talking pre-spawn still. If you go out on a cloudy day mm-hmm. in the pre-spawn, does that change the way you fish versus the sunny day?
It does. And it's the same really seasonally, like almost any season. Smallmouth, from what I hear in the South more so, they like the nasty weather days. And these are reservoir fish more so. But here in these natural lakes, up north, it seems like the best bite and the most movement is when it's sunny and they can see and they can track and they're moving and they're trying to find something to eat. They go into eat mode. Whereas cloudy days, I feel like your strike zone goes from like way out to just very small. And I think that's what makes it tough, is because their vision isn't great and you've got to keep pounding them on the head in order to get them to bite. You got to be very accurate. That's where the forward facing comes in on those days. But those days can be very challenging. You have to be very persistent. Typically not the days you're just going out and just waxing them, unless, there's a front where the barometric's falling and you're catching them during that, But if it's just a typical cloudy, kind of rainy, crappy day, it's not the best conditions. They're not like that.
I'm glad you said that, because a lot of times, I'll get people, that are from the north. I'm from the north myself. Mm-hmm. I'll get people down here. It'll be the worst, like wind, rain, overcast conditions. And I'm like, I'm going fishing today. And they're like, why? It's not pretty out. And I'm like, the fish down here are not like the fish in Michigan or in Pennsylvania. They like this stuff. They like that pressure dropping. They like that nasty weather. We talked about it before the show. The key to our success a couple weekends ago was wind, rain, and overcast. that was what generated the most bites. And then when you move into the sunny conditions, you got to change your whole game plan versus up in PA or in the Great Lakes region. You're looking to be a fair weather fisherman in those conditions. You like that stuff, right? Like that's how they eat. They love that stuff. And so
the smallmouth do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and that was going to be my other question before we, transition into spawn and whatever. And Ben has some more questions about pre-spawn. If you have those cloudy, nasty days, do you say scratch the smallmouth? I'm going after largies.
I mean, I should, but I'm kind of stubborn in that regard. But yeah, I mean, if other lakes are good around me at the time, like Chautauqua Lake's not far, that's probably a better option to go up there and, throw a moving bait, try to catch some largemouth, something like that. But I'll try to force myself to fish in those conditions just to try to adapt. So I know just different ways I can adapt to that change. And like I said, most of it's just being extremely efficient and just making sure your bait is really, really staying in that strike zone. Whereas your strike zone's enormous when it's sunny and the conditions are right and they're moving. Like you can throw anywhere sometimes and catch them, but that's the thing. Like smallmouth can be easy to catch, but they can also be extremely challenging. And you have to be, versatile at being able to take on both situations.
I'll turn it over to Ben here in just a sec. The last thing I have is you're also in a unique position because you're not only looking at it from a tournament angler perspective, but you're also a fishing guide, which we talked about before. Yes. So conditions will dictate where you take somebody for a guide trip, right? Because if it's a cloudy, overcast day and you don't want to sit there and scope them all day, you might have to change lakes.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that is the case. Like, we don't have a ton of places to go to that are unlimited horsepower around here, but I've got a couple of places that if need be, or just the weather, the wind's blowing too hard, we can audible a little bit. But most of the time, I mean, we're going to try to make it work. And if we can get out there, I think we're going to catch fish and have a good time almost every single time. So.
Yeah. You got anything on pre-spawn?
No, I think let's go ahead and transition from the transition to the spawn.
The spawn.
The spawn. Let's briefly talk about spawning smallmouth. Besides the fact you can catch them multiple times, which would be a blast. Especially if it's a big one, take like 6 different photos. Be like, I had 30 pounds out there.
Yeah, you did.
That's
like MLF style, catching the same fish off of the bed.
There it is. But yeah, let's talk about that transition. When do you start looking, or what keys you in to start maybe looking to the spawning areas from where they had just been, in their kind of pre-spawn holdups. And so, water temperatures, stability, clarity, moon phase, all that good stuff.
Yeah, the moon phase definitely is a big factor. Like the big waves come on the right moon phases, and typically, it's going into a full moon, but they aren't quite as finicky, about it. If the conditions are right, there's going to be spawning smallmouth. And I want the full moon, but not completely imperative. Once that water's up around 60 and it's fairly stable weather, you got sun, you got warming conditions, you're going to have some spawners. I mean, you're always going to have some fish spawning. And that'll pretty much last up until, it's 70 degrees and, upper 60, 70. So you have a little bit of a window there, but that's when they're wanting to be bedded down. I mean, right before that, they can get kind of finicky. They can get kind of weird as they're transitioning, as you guys probably know, that in between right before they're about to spawn and the weather's not perfect and it knocks them back and it gets them,
it's happening right now.
That is what we're dealing with right now.
Yep. So that can be a tough time too. I mean, that's one of the tougher times, but like you guys know, any transition time can be a big challenge
100%.
Because you've got fish in all different wet phases and moods and everything. So smallmouth are no different. So that pre-spawn and that post-spawn is hard. Post-spawn can be very challenging, but that pre to spawn and then the post-spawn periods can be challenging because things are changing very frequently.
You mentioned that is largemouth are the same way, and that's always down here in March, April, May. it's one of those things that we all love the tournaments in the spring because it can be just right.
Mm-hmm.
But if you hit it just a week wrong, you go from like 30 pounds to 12 pounds because they get that post spawn blues. Oh man,
or the pre spawn blues.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I feel like that's a high probability. And by the time everyone's listening, watching this, like we will know the results of what's going to happen this weekend. But the weather is just showing the indicators of being what you talked about, Destin, that really challenging time. The migration, what is so, with largemouth and by no means, folks, like Destin crushes largemouth, but we're on smallmouth topic. But, for largemouth, we kind of understand the migration patterns, like moving up into spawning flats, from deep water channels, what am I looking for here?
I mean, they go
creek
from the
channels and winter holes,
points, secondary points.
They're following channels is like highways, essentially.
Yeah. So
ditches.
What about smallmouth, especially in the Great Lakes? What does that migration pattern look like?
Yeah. So we have a lot of flats. So there's a lot of flats. There are drop offs, like I was talking about as well. They're going to move along these flats. They're going to stop at certain places. Rock piles. Things they can kind of hang for a little while, maybe feed up, keep moving, following bait, hang out near drop off, just kind of chilling in that in between zone as they're moving through these deeper areas. I mean, they're using channels too to travel, but the places that you're usually catching them is near the drop offs, near a rock pile on a deep flat or a shallow flat structure. They'll hang out around that. They're not as a largemouth, if you throw out a branch, there's going to be a largemouth on it, Smallmouth will relate to that stuff, but they move way more, They're not as homebody-ish in that sense, and especially when they're chasing bait fish. But, they'll settle in and they'll hang out, schools hang out by a rock pile or, hang around this drop-off for a while, but then they could move, That's kind of what they're doing. They're just using those breaks. They're using those channels. Not too different. It's just natural lake topography versus, a impoundment, a man-made impoundment. And we don't really have those creek arms. We have creeks, we have rivers, tributaries, but you don't have those arms like you do, in a lake, in like a reservoir. They're essentially just big circles. And then you've got tributaries coming in. Some you can get in, some are, too shallow. But the fish will go back in the creeks and tributaries as well. There's some that go and spawn in those, just depending on how much water there is.
When you find them on these spawning flats that you talked about, they're spawning. Correct me if I'm wrong. They're spawning on hard spots, right? They want to, or is it?
Yeah, they like harder bottom. Yeah. So sand is a great place for them to spawn. It's a solid bottom, like cobbly, gravelly, rock type. That's what they like. We have big shale flats here. They like the shale. Any of that stuff is just going to be solid. They will spawn on that.
So are you, when you're looking for them, how much does vegetation, I don't know if there's any vegetation up there at all, but does that play a role in the smallmouth spawn?
I think it can, because they can use it as like a buffer to shield themselves a little bit. But I think it's just a byproduct. If there's hard bottom and there's grass around it, then the hard bottom's what's drawing them there more so than the grass, right? Because the bottom composition is more important than that kind of cover. They like to butt up against something. They like to butt up against a rock usually, or something in the water to make a bed sometimes too. I don't know. They just like that kind of a safety behind them where they don't have to watch their back. I mean, maybe in that aspect of the vegetation, but I don't think it plays a huge part in it. Other than that.
So you're pulling a rod, you spot them, they're spawning. What's the first bait you pull out of the rod locker and you're like, yep, I'm going to target them?
Yeah, I was just talking to a friend about this, and typically I just want a bait that's small. I want something small because obviously their mouth is small, and most of the time if they're on a bed, they're just looking to get it off of there. So they're not necessarily just sucking it in and, trying to eat it. They're just grabbing it, taking it, spitting it, right? So the smaller the bait you can have, it's going to entice them and make them mad. Anything like a really, really small swim bait, grub, little Ned rig, really small Ned rig too, that kind of stuff, little tube, anything that's just going to irritate them. And every fish is different, but we have pretty pressured smallmouth here, I would say, in around the June, time. So they get a little finicky, but not, it's still smallmouth.
Sure. So, and folks, if you're listening, you can go over to OneCastFishing.com and get some weedless Ned heads because they're pretty clutch. Use the code TheOneCast, save 10%. But I will say I've used them to Demiki rig too, and it's pretty effective. So so now that forward-facing sonar is, well, it's been out for a long time. When do you break the flogger out versus use the forward-facing sonar? Especially since now you talked about the fish being pressured. Mm-hmm. Is the flogger still an effective technique getting right over the top of a bed?
And I was going to, as you get ready to answer that, is forward-facing sonar going to change that when you can just look on your screen? And because we're seeing guys catching bedding fish in muddy water, not ever seeing the fish. Obviously, they're shallower because they're largemouth. But is it going to get to the point where the flogger becomes maybe obsolete in some of these trails because they can just use their electronics?
Is a flogger going to be flog-solete?
Flog-solete. I like that one. That should be the hashtag behind you guys.
There you go.
That's going to be on shirts, the OneCast shirts. I still use it depending on the bottom composition. So here's the bottom composition and then the visibility. So if I can't see, in the water and see that fish, which obviously some situations you can use your electronics to do that. But if the bottom composition doesn't allow you to distinguish between a bed and a fish and stuff, if there's too much vegetation, stuff like that, that can inhibit you being able to see them with your electronics. So that's where a flogger comes in. The only place, there's two places I've used a flogger extensively, and that's Champlain and Thousand Islands. And you need it. You definitely do. It helps a ton because a lot of those fish spawn really deep and just right outside that, field of vision. And just the way they sit on flat nothing, like it's hard to distinguish them from, anything.
What for everyone listening or watching, what is a flogger? Because every time I see them used in some of the tournaments, there's always comments like, what is this thing? And a lot of people still don't know about it, especially if they're not tournament fishermen. They're just going out there for fun.
Yeah. So the technical term is a bathoscope. So it's a device with a plexiglass ring, a clear plexiglass thing. And it's got a cone coming up to like a smaller point with a thing that fits around your eyes and your face to block out the sun. So you can look down in there and have no glare and see through that plexiglass. It's kind of like a glass bottom boat, concept. That's what I tell people. So you can block out the sun because that's what's inhibiting you from seeing just visually, even with your, polarized glasses. Like I have amphibia glasses. I can see most of the time, but if there's glare, just depending on how the sun is, like you can't see 20 feet down all the time. So
does it help if there's a little ripple on the water too? Does it help because that ripple will break up being able to see down?
Yeah. So you're talking about if it's ripple, like you want to have the flogger. Yeah, for sure. Like the best conditions just to see them with your eyes is when it's like flat, slick, calm, just glass. I mean, that's the best time to just visually see them without having to use a flogger or anything. So whenever you get that ripple and it's just like, I can't really make that out, that's when the flogger comes in handy big time. Like I've been in, 2-3 foot wave just on the front deck like this, trying to see a fish.
You got to strap yourself in for that.
Yeah. Somebody's got to hold your ankles while you're hanging over the side of the boat.
So when you're using that flogger though, like in the perfect conditions, you're also fishing with one hand at the same time a lot of times, aren't you? Like dropping your bait right on top of the fish, or do you? I've seen guys do it, but it seems extremely challenging.
Yeah, some people do that. I usually, what I want to do is pick out like a target. So when I see it in the water and I can kind of distinguish, all right, this is what I'm looking for specifically, where the fish, the sweet spot is, just based on looking at them. And then I'm going to come back and I'll see just a transition in color. And that's what I'm targeting. I'll put the flogger down that I'm fishing and just keeping it in that strike zone. I keep making repeated casts in that strike. That's how I do it. I don't typically just go like this and fish with one hand. Some people do, and it works for them, but I'm just different in that regard. I'm not opposed to it. That's just the way that I've learned to do it.
So you're targeting these bedding fish. They moved up from their winter holes. They're on the structure that keeps them safe, gives them maximum UV penetration to incubate their eggs. You're targeting them with smaller profile baits because A, they are smallmouth, and B, they're not trying to eat. They're trying to move off their bed, just like largemouth do. You're using Ned rigs. You're using small swim baits. Does a drop shot play a role?
Yeah, I didn't specify. So a lot of times I'm throwing a small swim bait on a drop shot, so I can keep it in that strike zone.
Yep. So the fish, just like largemouth, there's other predators that are feeding on those smallmouth eggs, right? What are some of the biggest predators? Probably what, panfish, like bluegill and stuff like that.
Big time bluegills. We have pumpkin seeds, which is just another sunfish. They're eating them. Rock bass, another predator.
Oh, yep.
They're panfish as well. Gobies, big time.
Gobies eat them?
Oh yeah, they eat the eggs. Yep.
Yeah, a little bit of eggs.
Well, I mean, I did catch a goby salmon fishing in Wisconsin one time, so it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, you can catch them we catch them on artificial lures because they're just so aggressive. The gobies.
That's crazy.
Speaking of panfish and bluegill, I still consider it the spawn, right? Fry garters, right, with the large mouth. You see, you a lot of times use a bluegill bait or a Senko or something to get them. Do the smallmouth guard their fry? Like the largemouth?
Yeah, it's a similar, I think it's a similar time frame too, where that male will hang out and kind of guard that ball of fry for a while. And the Senko is a really good option for those fry garters for sure.
Now, are the smallmouth fry garters, are they as difficult to catch sometimes?
They can be really stingy for sure.
Yeah,
especially because people they're constantly fishing for them because they can see them. They're just kind of moseying around.
So, the glide bait game and big swim baits they've been and are becoming even more popular now for bed fishing, for specifically for fry garters, and I think even sometimes they're fishing them while they're on the bed. Do you guys do anything like that for smallmouth up there when they're on the bed? Throw big wake baits or glide baits and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times they will show themselves. It's a good way to, cover some water and maybe find out where some fish are spawning, like throwing a swim bait. That's a good technique to at least find where they're at. Might not be great for hooking up, but you're going to have a more pinpoint area to target.
Yeah.
And once you find them that way, then you can just kind of bear down and pick them off, with the slower moving stuff too.
Okay.
But so it's very effective. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so pre-spawn, man, they're eating, but they're just like largemouth. They're hungry. They're feeding up for the spawn. Then they slow down in the spawn, just like largemouth. And then the post-spawn happens. So
the dreaded post-spawn doldrums.
Yeah, I mean post-spawn, but they're moving into their summer patterns, which
I would like your opinion on that. When does post-spawn, like the post-spawn end and the summer pattern begin? And like, because I'm thinking down here you have your post-spawn blues, they slowly migrate out, and it may take them a few weeks or so. Up there on the Great Lakes is the same way, or are they following the same patterns back, or are they faster?
Essentially, they are. Yes. They're, like I said, their spawn can kind of last for a month and a half, depending on the lake, because Lake Erie proper might have colder water than the bay. So the bay could be done. Lake Erie's the actual lake, the main they're still spawning fish, and the fish from the bay are leaving and getting more into that, post spawn summer quicker than the ones that are, out in the lake and in the cooler water. So they are basically following the same train back out of the areas that they were, coming to, and stopping on staging areas, typical, very similar to where they're going to stop on pre-spawn, migration, and following bait too. They want to follow bait schools and start eating up again, because a lot of them are beat up and just trying to put on some weight again.
Yeah, I asked that because the few spotted bass fisheries I've been on and spotted bass I've caught kind of post spawn early summer, it seemed like to me that the spotted bass, at least when they spawn, of course they're spawning closer to the main lake anyway, on like in the Ozarks and all, but they make a beeline more towards those summer areas, and they seem to be more aggressive sooner. Just one, because I think their nature, and two, I just think they're more pelagic. They swim around, so I didn't know if smallmouth kind of were along the same lines. Because we know largemouth, sometimes it takes them a while to get out there.
Yeah, post spawn smallmouth, it's funky. It depends on the time, like where it is, but Erie can be fickle, in that post spawn time, just because they're moving and they're beat up, they're pressured, they've been caught a bunch, from the spawn, pre-spawn spawn, and now into the post spawn. They're just weary. They're more aware of things. They're more aware of when they're being hunted, essentially, and they're just trying to chill. They're more spooky, and they're just harder to catch in general. And once they kind of flip that switch a little bit more towards, gets a little bit more towards that summer pattern, then they start feeding more. But you'll have like in those times, you'll still have like, a quarter of the fish spawning, and then the other, bit of them, the other 3/4 are in that post spawn to summer, right in that region.
So when they do that, when they, do you go immediately looking for the fish that are already in the summertime pattern, or is that kind of how you do it? Like you'll go fish for spawning fish in the same day, you'll fish for pre-spawning fish, for spawning fish, and for summer pattern fish? Is that kind of how you target them, or do you only go one thing specifically?
You're saying pre-spawn too, like pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn at the same time?
Yeah, because they're in different stages, right? You said so.
Yeah.
Will you still have some in pre-spawn stage while the other ones are spawning, and some of them have already moved offshore?
A very few at that time, but yeah. I mean, there's always some late spawners. Like,
sure,
you might find some in mid-July, time. But I typically want that summer established pattern back.
Sure.
I don't like the post-spawn pattern. I think it's really fickle and hard to stay on it. So I like to look for the further along ones, but you kind of got to dabble and mix it up more, depending on how many are in what phase. And if they're really scattered around the phases, then you kind of got to mix and match or hope you land on a good part of one of those other ones.
So if you haven't found a good summer pattern fish yet, and that really crappy post spawn time is taking place, what are your baits you're typically throwing at those fish? I mean, you said they're beat up, they're fickle, they're conditioned to all the baits. Is that when you really pull like an arsenal out and you have 57 rods on the front of your boat?
Yeah, you got to get creative. Those fish are, like I said, they're super pressured, and like a little hair jig, which I didn't mention, that also a very good option in the pre-spawn, is a little black hair jig, typically black. You can throw a lot of different colors. Hold on one second. What's up, B?
Oh, we got a guest back there.
Go ahead, B. Jump up. Come on.
It's okay. Get down.
There you go, girl. All right.
She, that was really cool though. She looked at you for your permission.
Yeah, she does a lot. Honestly,
yeah.
She's good about that. Yeah. So like a little hair jig is really good. It's very subtle. You got a mayfly hatch is another thing to consider.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So mayfly hatch is another thing that's going on. A black hair jig, mimics that. A spy bait, real finessey, real, unassuming, hardly any action. Is basically just going along like this. The jig minnow coming back in more so like horizontally, the mid-strolling type technique. You're going to have some fish that are suspended. You're going to have some fish that are just cruising. So, picking them off that way. You can still catch some on jerkbait and some of that stuff, just depending on their mood. But overall, they're usually a lot more weary of that stuff. And
so you really need to throw the kitchen sink at them, right? As they say.
Yes.
I wonder where that saying came from. I'm gonna throw the kitchen sink at them. Did somebody throw a kitchen sink at somebody?
Yeah, and the other one is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I was just thinking about that one too, dude. Like, what?
I guess it's like a warning label on a box. Like somebody definitely tried it, so you got to be warned.
And I guess I put the sink with it because a lot of times you give your babies a bath in the sink. And all
I guess so. All right, so and by the way, I learned this: mayflies only live for 1 day, right?
Yes. Yep.
1 day. What a
short but sweet.
What a terrible creature. Like
There's
I feel
a
bad
lot of insects that live for like a day or two. Like
look.
They take forever to hatch, and then they live for like a day.
Yeah.
You mentioned insects. This is a total tangent, but I read an article about cicadas the other day.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just that, they come out of the ground every 13 years, but all they do is they drink the sap, and they have the most powerful urination system, like feet per second.
Oh.
And then there's also some STD that turns them into a zombie. And
from cicadas?
Yeah. It's for some reason, some fungus gets in them, and it also causes STD. And I went down this rabbit hole because these are some crazy creatures.
We love to educate and inform. So if it's not the kitchen sink, it's cicadas and mayflies. All right, dude. So let's hit the summer pattern last. We've been going for a little over an hour here, so I don't want to keep you from enjoying family time but I definitely want to dabble in the summertime pattern. That's when things are probably extremely fun for smallmouth fishing, though, huh?
Here it can be. Our part of Lake Erie is they're very nomadic. They're a lot like, they act like pelagic fish, so they move. They're moving a lot, and you've got thermoclines setting up. You've got things that are constantly moving around with the wind. So the thermocline changes with winds, right? Mm. And sun penetration. So that it can make it challenging.
Can you break down? We know what it is, but for everyone listening and watching, what's a thermocline? Because I think a lot of people are.
Yeah. So like you have stratification in the water. As it gets hotter, like in the summer, the water is going to stratify. So this is going to be like the warm layer that's not got as much oxygen. A lot of the oxygen is getting sucked out of the water. And then you're going to have this sweet spot where like it's cooler. It's the most well oxygenated section. And then below that where it's basically, there's nothing. Like it's just no oxygen is sucked out because this is where it stops essentially. So you got to find that sweet zone where that thermocline is, where the right water temperature is. The bait are going to be wanting to be around it. The predator fish are going to be wanting to be around it. And they're going to ride along that thermocline. It essentially becomes their, cover. They're using it to relate to. So they're using the thermocline to relate to it, and so it moves them. It moves them around.
Mm-hmm. And how do you find that? Settings on 2D?
You can tune in your 2D and stuff and see like there'll be like a fuzziness. You can kind of find out where that sets up. I mean, typically here it's pretty deep. And it can drive them really deep, and it's hard to target them when they're really deep. I've found some ways to do so and be very efficient, but I'd say overall, if you just came here to do it, it's very challenging. Sure. It's taken me a long time of trial and error to really get a very consistent pattern going in the summer. And you've got windows, so you usually have a very early morning bite, shuts off, and then you'll have another window typically, in the mid-afternoon and maybe in the evening. You basically have 3 feeding windows. Because in the pre-spawn time, a lot of times they'll feed all day, pretty much. You can find fish feeding at almost every time, depending on the weather. But in the summer, it's very specific as to the feeding windows that you're going to have. When it gets hot, smallmouth are, they're a cool water fish. They're not a cold water fish, but they like cooler water, so they're looking for that cooler water. When it gets hot in the heat of the day, a lot of times they're a little finicky, but there's certain times that they do feed and bite. They're very specific about it. and where they set up and actually do feed. And you got to be there at the right time. It's almost like a tide. You kind of have to time it right, and you could be at the right place at the wrong time and just miss it, you know?
Yep. What's your method for that morning bite, targeting them in that summertime pattern?
Typically, because they're so deep, it's drop shot. You know, that's one of the best ways to do it, just because I can get it down there quickly. I can be efficient if I'm fish throwing at specific fish, which I don't always do. That's what people think. Like, you just forward facing sonar out here. I don't. Like, that's not how I learned, and I still catch them off of 2D, or I just catch them just knowing that they're in an area and just having the instinct. You know, a lot of that happens in the summer because you can't always see them so easily, and they mix in with a lot of other fish. So there's walleye, there's all kinds of stuff. You have to be able to distinguish between those, and a lot of times you can do better of that. You can do that better with 2D. You know, I can distinguish. That's how I learned how to tell a walleye from a bass and a sheep's head, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, that does make sense, because for years of 2D, we've learned how to distinguish walleye, crappie, catfish, kind of how they set up, how the sonar returns based upon their density and all. With forward-facing sonar, guys are really good at telling fish apart, but it's a different perspective.
100%.
And so, you have to retrain your brain to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, if you grew up your whole life with forward-facing sonar, and you didn't know how fish set up, and you just saw fish swimming around a screen, I can tell you that I thought a turtle was a bass the other day on forward-facing sonar until it came to the surface, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I just threw my cricket at a turtle."
Well,
you know,
I caught some big catfish on a spoon doing that at watery because it's like 20 feet of water, and these look like 4 to 5 pound bass, right?
Yeah.
Swimming around, schooling around, going after the shad, chasing my spoon. And I finally hooked one, and no, it was a doggone catfish.
And you got and you don't just have walleye and stuff. You got muskie, right? You got northern pike. You got species of salmon in that system, don't you?
We have lake trout.
Trout.
Those are out there too. Steelhead trout.
That's right.
Sheep's head are trash fish that are in the same areas.
We should have a sheep's head tournament, dude.
That's a freshwater drum, right?
Yeah, it is freshwater drum.
I've caught one of bugs before.
I'm telling you, you should.
Yeah, they have them in a lot of river systems.
Oh, do they?
Mm-hmm. So Ohio River, Mississippi, all those big channelized rivers have.
Caught a big one on a 5XD.
Never caught one in my entire life.
Lucky
do you ever?
5XD, yes, they do like crankbaits. They do like crankbaits.
I thought I had a monster on.
Speaking of, so you talked about targeting them with the drop shot, but is there times where you get on a good topwater summer pattern and a deep cranking pattern and things like that with smallmouth?
Yes. Specifically on Erie, not as much, but yes, like I've been to some shallower places, and even the western basin of Erie, which is much shallower, I've got on very good, cranking bites there and had really good tournaments just cranking. I prefer to power fish. I like to crank. I like to move. I like to basically run and gun. That's mostly my style. But I mean, I have to do what I have to do here to catch them. But when like this time of year, when I could just go blast them on moving baits, like I'm just gonna lean into that.
For sure.
But yeah, like you definitely can. And the places where it's a more shallower summer fishery, yes. So like the western basin of Erie. The eastern basin of Lake Ontario, you've got a lot more shallow fishing opportunities with the river mouth. Even around Buffalo, you've got the river mouth. St. Clair is a good cranking place in the summer, really good. And you don't have to hit the bottom. They'll just come up and get it. You only have to like crank your crankbait down and like bang it off the bottom. They'll just fall.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. That's one of the only places I've seen that like consistently.
Do spooks or any sort of walking baits, do they work up there?
Yeah, at a lot of the places, yeah. Champlain is probably the best spook lake for smallmouth in the country, in my opinion. Really? Oh my gosh, yeah. So like Champlain, typically the main forage has been alewives and perch, but when they're on that, alewive, they just absolutely destroy it. Perch too. I mean, they'll eat a spook like if they're on a perch bite too, but they just absolutely annihilate a big white spook.
Really? So that's almost like putting the blueback herring lakes up against the alewives in Champlain and stuff, huh?
Yeah, an alewive is a herring, so
Okay.
it's in the herring family. So they have a lot of the same behaviors and seasonal patterns. So yeah, when the alewives are spawning, it's very similar to what you experience on the herring lakes that you guys have as far as targeting them, and they just get super grouped up and they get on top water really good. And that's the time I fished Champlain, the last elite. I was catching them on jerkbait really good, and Keith Combs was catching them on spook, which is typically what my bread and butter up there, but I just couldn't get them to eat mine for some reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean they were on perch bite, but they were also eating alewives.
You didn't have Keith's secret spook juice. Yeah, I don't know if
that's the head in like Okie shad. Okie shad is like the juice killer.
He was probably throwing what was the one that Reaction Innovations used to make?
Yeah, Vixen.
Like $300 now that you can find.
Yeah. I saw the one he was throwing an old Hedden one. It was probably like a really old one that had better like acoustics in it than like the mass produced ones now, because I think they originally made them and that's like the ones everybody pines after. I'm sure that's what he had, just so it was a different sound and stuff.
So we covered the spawn or the pre-spawn, the spawn, the post-spawn a little bit, which is kind of trashy for especially for a newbie going up there. It'd be a really hard time. And then the summer pattern. So as a new angler or somebody looking to go up to Lake Erie for their first time or in that region, but let's just talk Erie because that's where you live. Sure. If you were going to tell them to bring 3 baits, what would you tell them to bring?
So are we talking what season are we in, or just general?
Tell us the season they should come up.
Yeah, when should they come up?
Now.
Right now.
Yes. Like pre-spawn, okay. I'd give it another week or two, but I'd say like that mid-April to mid-May. That's the time. That's like the heat of the pre-spawn. That's when the fish are getting really grouped up. They're eating a lot. That water temperature is getting right. They got to eat to get ready to spawn. So this is when you catch a lot of 6 to 7 pound fish. They're showing up. Guys catch 8 occasionally as well. And the way to target, I mean, top 3 baits, definitely a little swim bait, a finesse swim bait. I would say something like a little Kitech, like a 3.3 would be good. On a ball head, like an Angler Tungsten Eclipse, that's the best ball head out in the market right now. Because it shows up good on your forward facing too, because tungsten is more dense.
Yep.
It's got a nice owner hook in it, really a meat gaff. I would definitely have a jerk bait. I would have the small swim bait. I would have a jerk bait. And I would probably have, look who's here.
Look at his face.
Hello there.
Ladies and gentlemen,
he's arrived.
We've been joined by our compadre here.
He helped me a lot because I was stumped on the third one.
So you said, what's up, Pete, man, before we go into this last bait thing?
No, you're good. I just had to tear my Ultrex apart because the steering cable was pulled apart.
Did you get it fixed?
I got it fixed. If I ever have to do it again, I can't tell you how I did it, but it's working. So,
well, you should have recorded the entire thing because it'll probably happen to one of us, and then we're gonna have to figure it out. So
that was me knocking on wood because Trey, you gonna pull it up the boat just in case?
Yeah, I was like, dude, do I need to hook the boat up and bring it up there as a backup or what?
No, bro, we're good. We're good.
All right, we're solid. Pete, we covered the pre-spawn, the spawn, the post-spawn, and the summer patterns for smallmouth fishing. Destin was just breaking down the last question that I asked, which was if you were a new person going up to Lake Erie, when should you come up, and what are the top 3 bait choices? And he said, come up right now, maybe in a week or two. Bring a small swim bait with a ball head, angler tungsten jig with a owner hook on it. It's a meat stick for sure. Owner is definitely one of my favorite hooks by far. and then a jerk bait. And then what was that third thing before Pete rudely interrupted
Pete
you?
Thankfully gave me some more time to like rack my brain because there's so many other things. It's hard to narrow it down into 3, but I'd say a blade bait.
A blade bait.
I would put a blade in that group as well.
Okay. We talking silver or gold or both?
If you had to pick, probably silver is going to be your best thing. For a newbie, that's just a bait fish color. It's going to get bit. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things we didn't talk about, and you can say yes or no to this, as much as technology has advanced and technology is relative, right? We're talking line technology, electronics, all that other stuff. We had an experience last year on Lake Lanier where we found that the fish were extremely line shy, specifically the spots, because they're sight feeders like smallmouth are. How crucial is your line for fishing up there in smallmouth land?
It's very crucial. The good example that I've told for a long time is one time I had a client and we were, throwing and pretty much you could call your shot and be like, you're going to catch a fish on this cast type thing. And he brought his own rods. He wanted to try out a couple of his own rods. And I'd be like, all right, throw over there. And he wouldn't get bit. I was like, are you kidding me? I'd throw over there, I'd bite, I'd shake it off, and be like, throw over there. And he would not get bit. And we kept doing this for a couple hours before I realized, like, what kind of line are you using? He's like, oh, a 10-pound mono. And I was like, wow, like it really, really makes a difference, that line. And part of it, I think people look too much into the fluorocarbon, like it's too, you can't, it's invisible in the water, blah, blah, blah. A lot of it is just the action that's imparted into your bait. When you're fishing finesse type stuff, you want it to be super natural and you don't want that line to inhibit the natural action of the bait. So the heavier line that you go, the more inhibited your bait is. So the action is not the same with 6-pound line as it is 10. Yes, mono is a little bit more visible than the fluorocarbon, but it's the line not allowing the bait to do its thing and look as natural as it possibly could. So that would definitely, that experience really reinforced, how important it is.
No, you're absolutely right on that one. And my experience with line, or the fact that it inhibited the bait's movement, was on Lanier when I could see Lake Lanier quality spotted bass on my graph, and I would flip 15-pound copoly in there and wouldn't get bit. And I literally sat down and took a few minutes because I didn't have a whole lot of tackle with me because I wasn't down there to really fish. I stripped that reel and I put 10-pound on there. 10-pound copoly. Well, I like copoly. It's cheaper. And I flipped the same exact bait that I took off the 15-pound, and I instantly started getting bit. Now, whether or not it was the line or the action of the bait or culmination of the above, I couldn't tell you, but it absolutely is a real thing. So when you took your client out there, did you end up switching his line out for him, or did you give him your pole, or how did that work out?
You can't use yours. Like, you just got to use this.
You can't use yours.
No. Immediately he caught a fish. Like, it was that quick.
Yep.
Because I had like 6 or 7 pound fluorocarbon on it. And it was super natural.
And for all the angler spouses out there that get really mad about a mini Bass Pro Shops being in the garage or in the boat, these are the reasons why we own. Well, specifically Pete, he clears the shelves, but like I might have 5 of one thing. Pete's got 500, but still, these are the important things. These are the difference between either enjoying yourself catching fish or catching quality tournament fish.
As I always like to tell folks, all tackle is just a tool. And there's some tools that you will rarely need. How often do you need that one specific socket for this one specific job? But when you're on the water and you're in that situation, you better have that tool with you at some place in your tackle box or in your boat, because if you don't, it could go from a good day to a very, very bad day.
Let me tell you the tool you always need in your house. If you have screens on your house, you need that little roller tool to get the freaking screen set inside the frame I tell you, like, it's like, why do you have that? And it's like, when I need to replace a screen, which doesn't happen often, but when I need to, I can't do it any other way. I need that
that's
tool.
a hard thing to do. You have to
you
have
need that tool, right?
Or the other one, if you're using like Plex plumbing and you have to crimp it, that tool's like $150 at Lowe's or whatever, and you only use it one time. Luckily, my neighbor's does that stuff, so I can borrow. But it's that type of deal.
So yeah, dude, you are in smallmouth. I don't know if it's considered Disney World, but you're definitely in smallmouth land. You're up there where, one of the most fun species sport fish live. You broke down the pre-spawn, the spawn, the post-spawn in the summertime patterns, what you recommend for newbies or people that don't have any experience. It's a great place to go to create memories with your family and friends, because smallmouth they're such an aggressive fish. They're a great fish to catch and release. I guess you can eat them if you want to. There's a creel limit for a reason. But what the mapping was the last thing I wanted to talk about. Not only because mapping technology has changed so much over the last decade or so, but there's also a lot of safety involved with that, especially on like a Great Lake that you're on. How important is mapping for Lake Erie, Champlain, St. Clair, all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely important. I would say overall, a lot of the Great Lakes mapping that I've seen is not super accurate. Champlain's probably a little bit more accurate. Some of those lakes are, but the Great Lakes, I don't think they've done a good job of really mapping that. I don't think a lot of people are out there graphing for whatever companies like, Navionics or whatever is out there with the boats like in North Carolina where they grid every part of the lake. I don't think there's a lot of people out there in, 200 feet of water going back and forth and finding all the contours out there. But, I mean, they do a good enough job. Like, you get the gist of it. And the good thing about it is, like, if you go spend your time out there and you find the stuff that's not on the map, that's the good stuff.
That's the juice.
Yeah, that's the good part about it not being, so accurately mapped like the lakes down in North Carolina and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I've used them all: LakeMaster, CMap, Navionics. They're all pretty good, and they're all about the same, honestly.
Okay.
Because I think there's not really a super accurate gridded. Nobody's really like gridded it well, like they do those smaller lakes.
Do you kind of hope they don't?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, part of me does.
Yeah, it's like, hey, like, stay off my lake and don't give my juice away. That's taken me 15 or 20 years to break down,
Right.
That's kind of where, the Johnston brothers talked about it, with forward facing sonar and stuff. And they talked about, what's taken us 10 to 12 years to figure out on, some of these big bodies of water is taking guys a day, to find that structure, that lone piece of concrete or whatever or a big rock pile that's out there in the middle of nowhere. But still there's a lot of secrets out there on the Great Lakes that nobody knows about, and we'll keep it that way for a reason. Before I turn it over to Ben, and you got anything, Ben?
No, I didn't have anything additional. I stepped out for a second, so I'm gonna have to listen to his mapping answer on the playback. But
yeah.
I don't know what you have next, but obviously we got to give Destin the opportunity to plug some of his sponsors. We've already talked about some of them, obviously, but we'll make sure we give him that opportunity. So, I don't know if you got anything else before that,
Pete. What you got up there at old Lake Gaston?
You catch them?
Nothing, man. I apologize for missing out. Time management wasn't the best, and I wasn't planning on being up here so early to be able to pre-fish, but it all kind of worked out. So
you catch them up there?
What's that?
Are you catching them?
Oh yeah, I got them super dialed in. You know how you can tell?
You probably have like 40 rods on your deck.
90 rods on my deck.
Yep,
so
that'll
I
do
know
it.
exactly what.
Hey, I mean, obviously this won't air anyway until after the episode, but it's a good thing your service is very good because we didn't see any of the baits that were tied up there.
All the secret baits.
I mean, I'll tell you what I'm tied on everything. So.
Yeah, legitimately everything.
Yeah, it looked like it.
That's okay.
We're trying to figure. We're pushing to the spawn here. We got a cold front hitting tonight, so it's going to be interesting. It wasn't great yesterday, and we went to a different lake today just because it was flooded, and we went and caught fish on frogs and had a blast. So
that's fun.
We'll get back. Yeah, we'll get back on the grind
you need
tomorrow.
That little mental reset once in a while and go out fresh.
Hey, that keeps your confidence up.
I was pulling my hair out yesterday, so
there's change it anyway. So doesn't even matter.
Yeah,
that's right.
So Destin, before we sign off here, we know that you got some new partners for the season, and hopefully those are long-lasting relationships. So do some of your partnership shout outs, and then we'll close this bad boy out.
Yeah, well, thanks, guys. I enjoyed it, like always. It's always fun talking to you guys. It's just like hanging out with my buds.
That's right.
Yeah, of course, Dura Edge, my main sponsor, been there for a long time. We do engineered soils for baseball and softball fields. Like I said, we just currently signed a deal with minor league baseball to be the official infield mix. So going to be tied up with a lot of that stuff this year. Just signed a new deal with Douglas Rods. They're up out of New York, and Doc's Tackle, kind of a tandem deal. They're up in the Finger Lakes region, up here in the North Country. They're going to be launching their online store sometime here soon too, so things will be available to everybody. But huge presence here in this area, not just for bass, but panfish and perch and walleye, all the lake fishing type stuff. And X2 batteries, been with them for a long time. Another X2 Classic winner, Hamner this year.
There you go.
Dusty last year. Hopefully me soon. And who else? Turwit Team Realty, my buddy down in North Florida, Phil Turwit. Shout out to him. Been with me for a few years as well. If you're looking down for real estate anywhere down in Florida, Phil is the guy. He will do everything he can to make sure you have a great experience. Great dude. I've worked with him personally, so I know for a fact that he will go above and beyond.
That's awesome. Well, dude, we appreciate it. Don't go anywhere. We're going to sign off here in a second. We wish you the best in this season. We're going to see you here in a couple months. We want you to reset. Refit, get your medical condition all squared away, enjoy the time with your family, and continue helping us grow a culture of anglers, helping anglers one cast at a time.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Oh, God, it's a toad. Get the net. Huh? It's a toad, dude.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.